Hi there, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. We're the podcast that takes you on journeys through the lives of those who have already embraced the international lifestyles. Whether you're an expat, a digital nomad, or someone who's dreaming of those lifestyles, this is your passport to a world of insight. We dive deep into the hearts and minds of the overseas lifestyle professionals, the authors, and researchers. Join us in this fun adventure as we deconstruct all the elements of expat and nomadic lifestyles, one captivating story at a time. Hello, listeners, and welcome. Today, it is my privilege to welcome a super guest. His name is James Richardson, and he is the author of the book, Our Worst Strength. Welcome, James. Thank you for coming to Nomadic Diaries.
Thanks, Doreen, for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm going to ask you to tell our listeners in a couple of paragraphs or less, just a little bit about your background. You might want to talk about that you are a cultural anthropologist and where you've been and why this is important for you.
I was on the academic track actually in my 20s. So I got a PhD in cultural anthropology from Madison, Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, and spent about 3 years in India, the deep south. It's called Tamil Nadu, and there's an old temple city there, which is very famous historically. And that's where I was based. Did about 20 months of field work prior to that, or a little over a year of language immersion training, heavily on the streets.
Yes.
Because I was hell-bent on running, relatively fluent interviews with folks during my field work, which I was able to do.
Congratulations. That's huge. Were you speaking Tamil or another language?
Tamil, yeah, that's
Tamil. Okay.
Although a lot of English is very widely used in Tamil Nadu, more than most provinces, including in rural areas. It's really interesting. So anyways, that's not true in a lot of India.
Yes.
So I came back. We'll get to that in a bit, but I came back and I ended up leaving academia right after I finished my dissertation. For a lot of immensely personal reasons, which I do share openly, but the short story is, I was having a mental health crisis and an identity crisis all at once. So the lesson, kids, is don't overcommit monomaniacally to your career and wind up in your apartment alone one day and realize you have no life. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
Please don't do that. I had to find employment. So I went and entered the market research sector. I got into business essentially through the side door, doing applied research for consumer brands. And I joined a firm that was in the natural organic space. So they were specialists in decoding trends in natural and organic food consumption.
Excellent.
For anybody who would pay. So that was actually kind of fun because it was, for an anthropologist, it was like the American version of a tribe.
Yes.
Like organic geeks.
Yes, organic geeks. I know a few.
Yeah, exactly. People paranoid about their food, right? So it's kind of interesting. Lots to chew on there. That was a nice transition. I mean, working for business was a painful transition for me, but I won't bore everyone with that. So then, I did market research and consulting for about 15 years, and then I went out on my own. And so I needed a little more autonomy. I wanted a different kind of client base that I was getting at the firm. I had risen to become a top executive at, but I wasn't happy.
And who are your clients now? Tell us.
So my clients now are such cool and hip names as, Dude Wipes, the butt wipe brand out of Chicago.
Okay.
And then Once Upon a Farm is founded by Jen Garner, the actress. I've done work for Patagonia. They have a food division.
Oh, how fun. Patagonia.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, my roster of clients is pretty fun, I would say, skewing more towards the early stage, less bureaucratic, less political, more enjoyable to work with than my old old gig where you're working with big companies and
sure,
it's just what it is, right? Pays the bills.
So we have a lot of people sitting in the room with us, as it were, listening to this, and they're either expats or they're nomads, and they're maybe wondering, what is a cultural anthropologist? Because my daughter has a degree in anthropology.
Yeah.
I should have an answer, but I still don't. So just tell us a little bit about, just give us a brushstroke of how you spend your days, what you spend your days thinking about.
So with that part of my brain, I'm digging back into my archives. So I would describe cultural anthropology as the art,
Mhm.
essentially, of decoding symbolic systems and value systems that are under the surface of consciousness. So they're driving behavior, but people aren't really thinking about it.
Mhm.
So these are the most powerful forces behind social behavior that are out there.
And
But
shows social change.
it's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about on TikTok. It's the
No.
opposite of that. So
Yes.
this is, in fact, the difference has gotten really, as the internet has scaled and social media has scaled, the difference has gotten more and more glaring to me
Yes. Yeah.
between the chitter chatter and the noise at the surface of life versus what's actually going on.
Sure. All the stuff that's in our subconscious, the 80% of the iceberg that we're
Yeah.
driving behind us, right? So that's what I talk about.
Yeah,
The-
and we've become a very talky, chatty society. Even during my own lifetime, Americans
Yes.
got even more like them, and the internet is part of that. But
Yeah.
I'm really an expert in behavior, and so an expert in looking at the assumptions behind behavior that are unspoken,
Yes.
that have to be sometimes inferred. Although, if you're a
Yes.
good interviewer, and I've become fairly good, if you're a good interviewer, you can actually talk people into unpacking why they're doing what they're doing right in front of you. That's not easy, but
No,
it can be done.
it's subtle. It's very subtle. So unfortunately, we probably don't have time today to go that deep, but can you tell us about how did your time on the ground, boots on the ground in India, doing research, learning the language,
Hmm.
talking to the people? I'm assuming this perhaps might have changed you at depth in ways that you may be aware of that the rest of us are not.
Correct. I a couple things, and I have written about this in my book too, because it sprinkles in. Every section begins with a memoir chapter, essentially, and a
Oh,
couple of them are on my time in India. One thing that I became self-aware of by living in southern India and speaking the languages is crucial because you won't form real relationships. People won't open up to you. You won't get invited places, access. I mean, it's but just speaking like an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old equivalent opened up so many doors because people were they were honored that you took the time to even bother.
to try. Yes.
Right. So and that I've never anywhere else on the planet experienced that much warmth and invitation just for trying.
Isn't that
You
wonderful?
you won't find it in France.
No, no.
So
Connaissez.
um
Je connaissais. See.
and you won't find it here either. So in the
No.
States. So that was really very heartwarming, I guess is the right phrase for me.
Yes.
I think a couple things that kind of changed my life, as it were, or my perspective on myself were I came to India very introverted, very socially awkward, very bookish. I later found out, that I have Asperger's
Oh,
as when I was 35, but I didn't know this at the time. I knew something was off, but I had no way to make sense of it. But when I went to when I went to India, the milieu is so focused on trying to get everybody integrated and find a place for them, no matter how weird they are. There's always some little, yeah, we could put you over here, we could do this. Da, da. They're so obsessed with integrating the individual that I just didn't feel very awkward there. Now, I was making faux pas, I was offending people and the like, but I didn't, and they would tell me usually, but I felt more at ease.
wonderful. What a gift.
Um, and I couldn't really understand it until I came back. We'll get to that in a little bit. So that
Mm.
was one, was that maybe I don't, maybe maybe my neurology just isn't suited to the States. Maybe I should be somewhere else. Right.
I understand that. I get
Like
that.
a place with more structure, a place that values community,
I get that.
a place that values, you know, making sure people aren't left alone by accident. It's something that Americans are really good at. You know, my in-laws live in a 55 plus community, which is supposed to be paradise, right? Your golden years and la 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 la, you know. And then like 6 months ago, we're on some random call. They're telling us that they had to pull some bodies out of a house down the street with a hazmat team because they'd been dead for months.
Oh my.
That's American community right there.
How's
It's happening more and more.
I believe it. I
These
understand it.
people are so alienated, right? That just can't happen even in urban India because people actually won't leave you alone.
They won't leave you alone.
No, like, but it's in this charming. I mean, sometimes it's threatening, but it's in a charming way for the most part because they're just trying to place you.
Yes.
Trying to make sure that you have a place, that everything's okay. And when I first got a rental apartment in India, the rental home in the community I was doing my fieldwork in, I had no less than 2 or 3 young adult men who were single offered to come sleep on my porch just to keep me company because they felt so bad I was living by myself.
Oh my. Wow. Well, you're really giving us
I mean, it's just like, and I don't think they were there to rob me. I really think that they just felt bad in a very Indian way.
This is a very different insight into the India that we have a perspective of.
Yeah.
Very, very different. Wow. And so, having had this really intimate, uptight, close experience that possibly changed you at depth, and how was it when you came back to the US? Did you come straight to the US or did you go somewhere in between?
No, I came straight back.
Okay.
Remember, I was in a doctoral program, so like the clock's,
Yeah.
it's not really ticking, but you know, the years are passing away. I got to get the degree, got to get the thing written, get it done, get on the job market. So I came back and I wanted to, you know, I also wanted to reintegrate. I was essentially celibate during that time in India. So you can imagine, it's a very conservative society. Foreign men really don't have many opportunities.
No.
For even basic relationships or sex or anything like that. But foreign women do.
Oh, really?
Oh, there's lots of action. So they're much less alienated than the guys who go and commit there. I mean, that's just a reality. No one talks about it, but
well, such a unique perspective.
So, you know, I needed to get back because I was a young guy, and and I need to get settled, and I did that. But here's, you know, as I was coming back, I was in a field where repatriation is sort of, that's part of your journey in graduate school. So, you know, there were people I had gotten previews of, you know, and warnings and you know, the biggest piece of advice I got was, you know, take it really slowly.
Yeah. So you were somewhat prepared because somebody had given you a heads up of what the journey was ahead after you came home.
Right. And I think the biggest warning was it'll be worse coming back than it was adapting.
Great advice.
And that's really true if you go somewhere wildly different, which breaks a whole bunch of rules on everyday social interaction and other things. And that's what I was experiencing. So, you know, on the way back, I came back much more socially confident because of what I said earlier. And for me personally, because of my bizarre neurology, that was a huge change. And I also realized if I'm going to live alone, mainly because I wanted to be heads down in a quiet apartment to write my dissertation, fine. But I had to work 20 times harder to make a community happen in the United States. Came back knowing I was going to have to fight for friends and just get out there. It wasn't going to fall in my lap like it did in India.
I understand.
So that was really powerful because I think that it's a very tragic realization, I think, because it what it reveals about America. I mean, you have to fight to maintain relationships here because we're so non-committal. I mean, people can't even commit to marriages that are healthy.
Yes.
I have 2 relatives who who just left their husbands because they were bored with them.
Oh my.
I don't understand this behavior, but that's what we've created.
Yes.
Rightly or wrongly,
Yeah.
And men have done the same thing, right? So that I knew I was going to have to really create my own world. I wasn't, but with Asperger's, what you want is actually a highly structured conservative society. That's what your brain wants.
Yes.
I'm just telling you, that's what you want. Predictability, but you want to be Amish. Like the Amish, the Amish with high functioning autism, I don't know that they would even stick out.
Right.
It would take you 10 times longer to figure it out.
Interesting.
Because they don't like change, and neither do I. So,
Yes. Yes.
So I knew I was going to have to fight, and that I just had to suck it up and do that. And so I actually had a much better experience after I came back in my social life. So there was one part of repatriation that was actually better because India had taught me about some differences that allowed me to see that I was asking too much of American society, right? I was this, you could call me spoiled, but I was really the product of the way my brain worked and the fact that I had always been in school,
Yes.
which sort of forced friendships like the Indian village onto you. And I was going to have to, as a young adult, I was going to have to go out and fight and make those friendships. And I was going to have to work at it. I was going to have to show up, spend time.
Yes.
And I did that. And so that part of it, that was so much better. Without that contrasting experience, I don't know what would have happened because I was not in the greatest place before I left for India. There was a healing that actually went on over there.
That's exactly what I was going to say when you were describing your experience. I was about to say that sounds healing.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's super common with people who go abroad. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. You would know better. You've interviewed more people. I was just in a more broken place, I think, than a lot of people.
I think it's very different for everybody, number one. But I do have a sense that the people I've interviewed mostly who travel a lot and who are, place to place to place, but who are flexible and conscious, that they're closer to their humanity than much of the way we live in the US. That's just a sense that I have.
It could be, yeah. I mean, and by no means is my expat length even that impressive. I mean, I know people spend much longer living abroad. Usually in Europe, though. I don't know a lot of people who, although I did meet one, and I met a guy who basically gave up his U.S. citizenship
to go live in India.
Yeah, and he married a Tamil villager, and he's still there, runs a textile factory. I mean, if you met him in the right context, like a hotel lobby, you'd just think he was some business guy.
Yes.
But then you peel back the surface, it's like, whoa, he's totally bilingual, married a local woman, totally enmeshed, has no interest in returning to the United States. He was the son of a missionary. That guy had what I would describe as totally debilitating culture shock because he grew up in India from the age of like 3. Went back for college and it was a disaster.
Yes.
Not only because it was the 60s, but also because the guy was basically Indian. He had American parents, but he hung out with Tamil kids. He was deeply, deeply divided. And that's, anyways, so I understand.
Yeah.
But he couldn't repatriate basically, Doreen.
And now we're seeing the effects of the adverse childhood experiences that third culture kids grew up in. My husband's mother, my mother-in-law, was a TCK, grew up in Malta, Egypt, Hong Kong.
Wow.
And her father was an army person who lived outside of the UK. He was British, but never really lived in the UK for decades at a time. So you can see how these kind of lifestyles built over decades and over generations changes at so much depth that we cannot adjust back or to some strange.
And I did not stay long enough to go to have that effect. I'll be really clear. Not only did I want to return, that's a sign that you haven't really fully latched in, but I wanted to return it did happen. So it was not as awkward as it would have been for other classes of people and some of them
Sure.
I actually know who spent 10, 15 years in Thailand or something. I don't know how they come back. Yeah, that's it. That's a
Yeah.
different order of problem. For me, repatriation was much more about what can I learn from this other way of life to make my own better. It was when you only spend 2, 3, 4 years, it's much easier to come back that way. Here's the bad things that happen. I just became I would say underneath all of my socialization, I just found myself looking at America with kind of this sad lens
Mm.
that I didn't feel condescending. It was not political. It was just, this is no way to live.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's never gone away, Doreen. That's why I eventually, when I got the time and resources, wrote this book, and I'm here marketing it because I want more people to
To
get
be
out
aware.
of the fishbowl that we're in of a highly
Yes.
autonomy focused, self-focused consumer society, which dissolves relationships pretty fast.
It does.
And I knew that coming back, and I'm like, I got to fight if I want to have friends, I've really got to commit real time. I got to keep showing up. I joined the swing dancing scene in Minneapolis. I'm sorry, in Milwaukee. That's what I did. So I would just drive, twice
Yeah.
a week there, and I put in the time. I'm like, I got to do it because
Yeah.
this is how I'm going to be somewhat grounded in this screwed up society.
And it becomes part of like a spiritual practice, doesn't it? It
For
becomes,
me, yeah, yeah.
for some people, their activities fill in for a spiritual practice or a faith or beliefs.
Well, and
And
I also knew that recreational worlds are where you can make friends as a young adult. There's no other way other
yes,
than church, other than a religious community. I'm not religious. So for
right.
me, it was either some kind of recreation or I would be depressed alone in my apartment again.
Yeah.
Because academia doesn't build community, Dory.
Mm,
I've never, it just doesn't. I mean, there's a tiny group of people in any doctoral program who are essentially anointed by a tenured professor as
really?
the next genius. They have a fine experience because, they call and get them a job and they line things up and they invest tons of time in them. But most grad students are just treated like tuition numbers in an Excel sheet. So, and that was certainly my experience.
Wow, you're certainly shining a lot of lights in dark corners for
Yeah.
us.
So like academia is like the last place you want to go for like healthy community.
Yeah,
It's a
interesting.
horribly toxic place. I actually find more community in like publicly traded like food companies if they're well run and managed.
Yes,
That's how bad academia is.
quite different.
And
So
it
that,
and it ends up self-selecting for very broken, weird. I'm
yeah,
sorry. That's just my bias. Anyways, like I didn't know it at the time of getting off that track. And India helped me, I think, realize that that there was I could be a whole new kind of person. I could be more social. I could be more socially confident.
so you were
Uh,
building a new identity. So
Pretty much. And I brought it back.
yeah, there you go. You brought it
And
back.
that I think that's what can happen when you don't stay too long.
Yes. Yeah,
Because if you stay too long, like that other guy was talking about, you can't go back. Like
correct.
you will. Anyway, there's another
There is no
story.
back. And there is no back, really, is
No,
there?
yeah, I mean, if you really go that far, and in my research for my dissertation, I spent probably way too much time reading old letters I mean, hundreds of letters from missionaries back to the home office and other stuff.
Interesting.
And that's where all the juicy gossip is. All the
Sure.
stuff that's not in the annual report. So you go in there and find out what's really going on.
Yes.
And it was amazing that some of these guys who are extremely conservative people could not go home,
Yes.
even when the mission organization said, "Well, you're retired, so you can go home," and
Yeah.
they just couldn't. They couldn't leave the lifestyle of colonial India.
Oh, look at David Livingstone in
Yeah,
Africa.
yeah, they just couldn't go home. And
A whole century before.
and
Yeah.
I got a taste of that, not to
Yes.
the extent that they took it,
Sure.
to that level of arrogance, but I got a taste of it. I mean, I had a cook. I
Mm.
had essentially staff at
Yes.
ultra low wages. And I could see how, wow, this could really
Mm.
go to your head. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of missionaries in India who are buried there.
Oh, yes.
You
Oh,
know, it was a one-way trip.
yes. I,
and I,
I
and
can
I always,
appreciate that.
I don't agree with their why they went. I don't agree with their religion or what their ideology. They ran great schools. I am humbled by that level of commitment.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So, and it wasn't why I ever went.
Mm,
Anthropology. There are some anthropologists who probably would rather just live in their field,
hmm.
right,
I can
forever,
imagine.
forever. But I found it's generally not the majority.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
because we're a little, we're a little over analytical. So
Sure.
we don't necessarily,
She
you know,
says, agreeing. Sorry.
yeah. So and we don't necessarily bond. Like I'm like the master class in bad bonding, but that's a function of high functioning autism is we have bonding issues
Mm,
with
mm.
humans, which India taught me, like without the diagnosis, it taught me, hey, you have to go force yourself into friendships because that's not going to happen. You are literally going to sit there on that couch and read books all day. So the world's not coming to you.
And look where you are now. Here you are in a position where hundreds of people are listening to your story. I mean, could you have imagined that when you were
No,
back?
I would have barfed.
When you were in India, the idea of being a guest on anybody's podcast at any time would have freaked you out,
Oh
correct?
yeah, I probably would have had a panic attack, which was another old specialty of mine. Which is a great segue to my funny repatriation, not so funny repatriation story. So there was a lot of upside, but the things that really culture shock that really got to me were stuff that I didn't see coming, Doreen, and I don't. I'm kind of embarrassed as an anthropologist that I didn't. But food,
Yes. Yeah.
I had I have a whole chapter on this particular tale, but I'll condense it. When I lived in India, I had a middle-aged woman who essentially came and cooked for me. She came in the mornings,
Mm.
she and cooked 3 meals and then stuffed them in the fridge. But she was basically there for about 4 or 5 hours. It was nice and condensed for her. And I paid her a monthly salary to do that. I was 7 days a week.
My goodness, such care. You were the recipient of so much care.
So yeah, well that was, I think it's a really good word you use because even though you were paying for it, you were getting attended to in a way that a young adult my age in America, especially young adult male, no way. I
No,
mean,
they
no
don't know.
way.
No, very few people understand the bond and the relationship of having staff, quote unquote staff, live overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and this was a small version of that, but it was my taste of it.
very much.
Anyways, so she would cook food, Doreen, by doing this. She would get up at 5 a.m. She would get on the bus to the market. She'd be there at 5:30. She lived across town. And she would buy everything for that day in little bags, everything. Then she would stop by the meat market, get the chicken if we were going to do that. But I generally ate vegetarian. And then she'd come to my place. She'd make the coffee. Then she'd start cooking
Mm,
everything from scratch. The chapatis,
yeah.
every sauce was from scratch
Wow.
every day, every morning.
Yeah. Amazing.
I had no food in the kitchen. I had prepared. She would come in with raw ingredients. She would leave with the remaining 2 meals in the fridge or on the counter, and I would eat them. But there's no snack food in the home. There's no branded anything. There were no bottles of sauces. Nothing. She would even buy the oil in
Wow.
little
For the
amounts.
day? For the
Yeah,
day?
she would buy the oil she needed in bulk because
Oh,
she came from a caste in
yes.
India, which is she herself was poor due to a painful divorce and a sad family tragedy. But she's from one of the wealthiest castes in southern India. They were the merchant castes, and they became wealthy bankers during the British colonial
Mm,
period. But her family had basically squandered and drunk away all their money, and she had to get divorced from an alcoholic husband, and so she's doing housework, essentially cooking. even though she's from a pretty elite community. So she was already swallowing her pride by showing up. Because I'm an anthropologist, I found a way to get this story. I just had to know.
Well, I
She
think
comes
that's
from she comes from a community that is literally, these are the best home cooks in southern India. These people have recipes that are just,
yeah.
it's hard to explain, but these people could work in Michelin star restaurants, just ordinary housewives.
I get it. I,
So,
I in my own family, I had an uncle who went to Burma with the Gurkha,
wow.
married a Burmese woman. I have 8 cousins who are half Burmese.
Wow.
And it's still the family tradition to have the curry
Right.
with all the sambals.
Yeah.
And they talk about the grandmother's, my great aunt or my aunt's recipes. I mean, that, although many of them have grown up in Glasgow, that has lasted a lifetime.
Sure.
Food is important.
That was a picture of sort of what was going on for my food. So all scratch cooked, all hyper fresh,
Yes.
incredibly tasty stuff.
Yeah.
Also really nutritious. Like my
Yeah.
GI, I've never been more regular in my life than having, 3 cups of Tourdal every day, because it's the highest fiber carb you can eat. And great diet. I come back to America and I get my new apartment in Madison. I'm back there, I'm back on campus, start writing my dissertation, boring, boring, boring. And I got to go get groceries, right? That's what the American does, right? I'm a bachelor living alone, mainly because I wanted the quiet.
Yes.
I needed I want to be able to write
Focus.
like a beast with total focus. So I go to the grocery store and I walk in, it's Cub Foods, pretty normal grocery store chain in Wisconsin. It's like Safeway on the West Coast. I go get my cart, and then it just goes downhill from there, Doreen. I was there really just to get like some breakfast stuff quickly. And so I'm going to the cereal aisle and I'm surrounded by all the noise. There's lights everywhere. And I turn into the cereal aisle and I literally freeze.
Yes.
And I start hyperventilating.
Yes, many. This is a story I have heard before from repatriates. Yeah,
Hyperventilating.
Mine was the milk aisle, and I started crying. Yes,
I was hyperventilating, and my brain was saying, "There's no food here. This is not a food store. I don't know what this is.
Yes,
this is bullshit." Right? Because in a cereal aisle, it's all marketing, right? It's all symbolism and brands. I mean, yeah, there's some pictures of ingredients, but basically, if you really stand back like an anthropologist, it's mostly symbolism. It's the opposite of the bulk food market where my cook went every morning 7 days a week at 5:30. So I literally had a full-blown panic attack, and I just abandoned the cart and ran out of the store and went home. The next morning I went to a natural foods co-op.
Mm-hmm. And was it easier?
It was much better.
Good.
Because when you walk into that store, it's no longer there. But when you walk into that store, it's basically a produce and bulk food store.
Yes.
Much closer to the market in India. Not as much packaged garbage, and it's not assaulting you when you come.
Yeah.
So it was like,
so you have to find something that feels more familiar or that feels more like the place that you came from. And that is what I call sewing our lives together. There's a little restaurant here called Mesa Marrakesh. There's 3 tables. You have to make a reservation ahead of time. But I have heard they have wonderful Middle Eastern food. So I'm headed there because I get the sense when I get my Middle Eastern food fetish fulfilled, at least once a month or so, I feel better at a deeper level. It's just because it's been part of it's something that I included for so long. I was in the Middle East for 20 years. So
yeah, that's impressive. Yeah.
It's important. These things are important, and we've made them all unimportant.
Well, I think the other thing that I remember feeling really sad eating by myself in that
Oh.
apartment when I first came back. It was just kind of it was like pathetic because, whereas in Tamil Nadu, I kid you not, I could have invited a friend to just come in and sit there with me as I ate.
Yes.
Maybe share some food, but they would have, like, people would have done that. Nobody was going to do that in
No.
the States. I mean, they would think you're nuts.
So based on this, do you have some advice for Americans who are considering going abroad or who are abroad and are considering coming home?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to do an inventory, sort of a self-awareness inventory of what, because this should be top of mind as it was for me, what has changed for you.
Yes.
What's different about your lifestyle here before you leave versus what it was before you came? And to do that in basic anthropological terms like friendships,
Mm.
romance, if that's relevant, wasn't for me.
Mhm.
It was not possible without being murdered.
Oh dear. Yeah.
uh, so, and then, work, whatever the basic domains of life, and notice what those differences are so that you can be prepared consciously for that. I think when it gets, and I do think something as basic as food should probably be more planned than mine was. I would have done better, honestly, just eating out of restaurants for the first month when I was back,
Yeah.
to be really clear, than to go through this bizarre
Experience. Yeah.
of,
Mhm.
just this navigating this processed food hellscape.
Mm. Yeah. Very, very interesting. And I tend to sort of tell people, every domain of your life is going to shift. Your
Yeah.
relationship with your money and your finances, your relationship with your people, the people you're leaving behind in your host country, and the people you're coming home to in supposedly your home country. Everything is going to change. Your career, your perspective, your beliefs, your values perhaps have changed.
I
And
would,
it's a
yeah,
lot, isn't
it
it?
is. And I think another tip just came to the surface as you said that, which was I honestly find a way in advance to give up hope that
Mm.
even your parents
Mm.
or people who actually do know you pretty well in terms
Mhm.
of years will ever actually understand what you went through. And
Yeah.
and just you have to forgive them in advance because it's unreasonable to expect that they could understand language, and a memoir wouldn't even do it.
Yes.
And wait for them to inquire out of curiosity. That's how if you do want to communicate, don't push it because it's not. I know I hid a lot of things from my parents, because I was unmarried, and
Yeah.
I'm still in that vulnerable state to a parent, right? Like the kid's not settled. So I hid a lot of things that needed to be hid. I almost got killed 2 times.
In India.
Yeah, I was drugged and abducted at a
Oh,
restaurant. All of that I hid because I couldn't bring that kind of emotional worry onto my parents. I
no.
told them later, but it would just been cruel to tell them that.
Absolutely.
And that
Absolutely. When they weren't in a position to do something about it.
and that's all a parent wants to do. That's with a child is, it's primal protection. So you don't tell stories like that. So being careful what you tell to certain people, but also don't expect them to fully understand. It's not their job. Their job is in the context of the relationship that they have with you. I mean,
Mm.
maybe, hopefully, it won't hurt your relationship. I mean, I have to say that one of the downsides, other than the crazy grocery shopping, well, John, you got to eat, right? So it's hard to avoid that one. It hits fast.
Yes.
I would recommend people stay with family for like 2 to 3 months as a transition, because see, then you're not going to the grocery store. Like you're
Uh,
just going to get. I mean, if
yeah.
you were taken care of, get taken care of by your family. Don't get over the regressive overtones of that, and just do that as a transition. And I
Yes.
ended up doing that by accident, which helped a little.
Well, that's a great piece of advice. I haven't heard that one before.
I think going to your family and rebonding with them is actually a great idea.
I
I
didn't have that
was,
option.
yeah, I understand. Well, some people don't have those relationships, and that is another problem with the West, right? Is we don't. Ever since the 60s, apparently parents just cut their kids off because they don't like their values. I mean, I don't, okay, it's a new
Mm.
thing. But that really ramped up. So there's a lot, I know when the research for this book, a lot of baby boomers, I mean, they just stopped talking to their parents completely. And it's sad. It's sad because you don't have that kind of bosom to go back to, right? When you have crises.
Sure,
And we all need that at some point.
we do.
It's not, you can't get through life without, it's just not possible. I used to think it was possible from a state of naivete. But I think one of the most difficult things for me, and I think if you live in a developing country or a poverty-stricken country, this is, Haiti would probably be the most extreme I could think of, coming back, most of us who do this travel expat thing tend to skew upper middle class, right? So we weren't necessarily the poor kids. And so our relatives are doing fairly well, and right, and they just don't understand what we saw, what we saw on the ground, what I saw in India. And you have to forgive people in advance for the fact that they're going to be spewing their upper middle class values at you at full throttle when you get back. They're not going to realize they should shut up.
Mm.
Right. But I came home and my parents are sitting there with an architectural plan for their new house. And I'm just sitting there. I want to vomit. That was my reaction.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's
it's pretty visceral.
That's really hard. You've kind of got a few oceans sitting in the middle of your living room right there, right?
Yeah, and I just couldn't relate. I just
still have distance. There's still distance. It's distance, but it's in a different form because it's not physical distance at that point, but it's emotional, spiritual, subconscious distance that we all experience.
And I still feel that alienation, which is why I kind of got it out of my system, I think, with this book, because it's never gone away. I mean, even at work, working with people who are well-educated, supposedly empathetic, curious-minded people, not like, AM radio rubes, I still felt distance from even them because I would just mutter to myself, these people just don't get it. It's like this lifestyle in America that we're living is transient, it's temporary, it's arbitrary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what I mean when I said earlier, it's kind of there's sadness forever, I think, because I walk around America and I even see it with my own wife. People just don't understand that this is a really weird way of living. And it has consequences.
Yes.
It has consequences, and a lot of them are quite bad.
Yes, you're talking to somebody who left America to go. America Light is what I call Mexico.
Yeah, I definitely didn't have America Light. I was thrown in the deep end.
Yeah, well, but this is my ninth country. I think
I know.
I've worked through a lot of this. So.
So I do think people have to be forgiving of your loved ones because they can't be expected to they just can't. It's ridiculous. So you have to have some.
Right.
And that's a good habit to have in general to keep relationships going. Constant forgiveness.
Constant forgiveness. 100%. 20 a day, huh? What about from living abroad and you had such a rugged experience, this anthropologist experience you experienced in India and being an expat. What do you think are the most valuable lessons Americans can learn from living in another culture? Because we have listeners who are maybe considering expatriatism or still recovering from it. I think it's a recovery process.
Yes.
And I believe it's a recovery process I will live till the day I die.
Yeah.
So tell me, what do you think are the most valuable lessons that we can learn while we're outside of America?
Yeah, almost regardless of where you wind up, with a few exceptions. I think living abroad, so I'm going to push my own children to do it in their 20s as well, like I did.
And me, yeah.
Yeah, is that it's I think critical for people to understand there's very different ways of living and differently. There's most of the world lives in much stronger relationship networks and communities than we do because they're not wealthy enough or crass enough to be focused on consuming media and things and stuff, right? And so when you don't have that, you're going to automatically revert to focusing on community. And I think people should have a taste of that so that they know how to create. Because here's the thing, you come back in America, and this is a country where you get to create your own lifestyle. It's like a choose your own adventure, Doreen. You get to make it up. And there's nobody can really stop you short of committing a crime. You can do almost anything you want. It is a crazy amount of autonomy to hand people without any rule book, right? And so a lot of people get lost. And so I think living abroad actually clarifies very nicely for young adults.
Well, this is fascinating.
Like it did for me. Like I actually need friends more than I thought I did. I thought I was Mr. Independent cool guy, Mr. Marlboro man, but I was full of shit. And I think that's the kind of life lesson you need when you're young.
Yes.
I think anywhere you go, you're going to see how the individual is not the center of the universe in most of those destinations. And that, to me, for any American, that should be mandatory experience.
I totally agree. So listen, just in the last few minutes, this is some of the wisdom that I have heard from James. And I want you, listeners, to please make sure you refer to the show notes. We will have all of his links in the show notes. But you said, when I asked you about returning home, you said, it is unreasonable for our families and our friends, particularly our families, for them to understand because they have not had that experience, right? Number two, the other gem you dropped was you have to forgive people in advance a lot, and all the time, I think you said. Number three, you said it is a crazy amount of autonomy that you hand people when you move to the US of A in particular.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The other thing you said was the individual is not the center of the universe in most other cultures. So these are all like little gems that you have sprinkled throughout this episode. And I want to talk to you again.
Great.
But this was really worthwhile. Tell us about your book, Our Worst Strength. Tell us a little bit about it, and can we get it on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon right now in a couple formats. The book is basically a anthropologist's view of everyday life in America using pretty much the sexiest available data sets that we have, and we have a lot of them now on everyday life, how people spend time. So it's a book that explores how individualism operates as a way of life in our everyday behavior in the 5 key domains that comprise 80% of our waking hours in order of cultural importance. So we begin with work, then we begin with recreation. That's number two in waking hours spent. And I'm including, surfing Netflix as recreation because it is. Then there's eating, food prep, drinking, snacking. We actually eat more times a day now. So we spend more time actually putting stuff in our mouths than the average person in most other cultures who has like 2 meals maybe and no snacks. There's an insight. Then in order of importance, we continue to friends, right? If you got any time left over, you call your friends, you hang out with your friends. And then the final lowest priority is family.
Family, yeah.
And it was written that way kind of to deliberately, some people have gotten it reading the book like, wow, he hasn't talked about marriage yet. I'm like, yeah, because you know what? This isn't a culture that's focused on that. This is a culture that's focused on individuals buying stuff, consuming stuff, and working. And having fun. Amazing. That may or may be with your spouse or not.
Amazing.
It's just like, so at the end, I have a section that's more college philosophy. And that's where I just explore. I try to tie some things up. It's not a book with like a really ham-fisted central argument because I wanted it to be it's a massively data-rich book. So you can come away with your own conclusions very easily because I present so much information. It's all story based, so I pick themes, how individual operates at work, where it blows up, right? And I use stories to do that, right? What are the limits of handing people this much autonomy with their career and actually not supporting them? Well, I explore that. What's it like giving people all this autonomy in their friendship world, and what goes wrong, right? Giving people autonomy in recreation, right? What are the upsides and downsides of that? And the biggest theme that came away as I was writing the book, which is always good when the author's learning as they write, is we live in just a massively non-committal society. Because that's what hyper-individualism wants. It doesn't want you encumbered by any obligations, because that makes you less nimble to react to market signals, marketing, consumer signals, right? Our economy wants you nimble, on the balls of your feet, ready to go. And that's the opposite of a conservative society, which wants you to be suspicious of all change. To consult the elders when anything new appears. Right? We're the exact opposite of that. And we call it our strength because it's just so exciting, Doreen, to have this freedom, right? Until you crash and burn. Because that's when you find out how callous the society is. We don't help people we don't have a grieving process for getting fired. This is one of the most common things that will happen to you, is to get fired or laid off due to nothing you did. And we have no structured ritual to help people through that. Well, a lot of people do. They crash and burn. Some become alcoholics. So the book explores with a sense of humor what it's like to live in this country. And I use older Americans and their reflections and experiences because we were the first you and I were the first age cohorts to be really given, I would say, the breadth of lifestyle autonomy that we now think is normal in the US. We think, we just think it's normal. And it was not normal, for instance, in my parents' generation.
Right.
They're in their 80s.
Yeah.
So, this is very recent. So it's like a slow rolling mass experiment.
It is.
And so it's my attempt to come to terms with that and what we can learn, how we can improve, because I do think we've lost our way. I think I said at one point, we've handed young adults especially so much autonomy in every domain of life. And our attitude is to hang back until there's a problem. Yeah. Well, that's a recipe for anxiety now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
Amazing. Well, I, for one, wish I had read the book before I talked to you. I am trying to catch up with a lot of my interviews, but I will definitely go out, and I hope that our listeners today will go online and find James's book, but also follow him. And in the show notes, we will give you all of the details and the places to follow him. Do you believe that we have any special, that there's anything to be gained by moving and traveling and living overseas that you would like to end with on this episode? You got a piece of advice or wisdom for us?
Oh, I would pick the most terrifying, exotic, non-American place you could possibly come up with, precisely because most of you are going to repatriate, and you should.
Yeah.
And you want to come back with maximum self-awareness, because that's the gift you're going to be given.
That is a fabulous note to end up on. You're going to come back with fabulous self-awareness, because that is the gift you've been given.
And I think that's how you succeed in this kind of individualist society, is with amazing self-awareness. Because otherwise you're just being bumped around by forces. You have this illusion of control. If you don't have incredible self-awareness in our society, you're not going to be able to self-discipline yourself to make wise life decisions and stuff like that. And the society's not doing it anymore, right? It's just not. They may hate, maybe they don't like the person you're marrying. They will not stop you, right?
Right. Well, thank you. This has been great. I want to continue this conversation at another time. Thank you so much for coming with us. Cheerio, masalama, and hasta luego.
Thanks for having me, Doreen. Been fun.
Such a pleasure.